Hey, you cane-ass with the mop. Get on the mat and give us a show.
Hey, you, with the mop, get on the mat and give us a show. The voice cracked through the dojo like a whip. Rain pressed against the windows of Harborlight Dojo, each drop slicing the reflection of fluorescent lights into trembling shards. The smell of disinfectant clung to the air, sharp, metallic, almost defiant against the musk of sweat and ambition. Rowan Hale paused mid-swipe, one hand gripping the wooden handle of his mop. He was a tall man, 49, his shoulders broad but his posture humble, a man who had spent years folding himself into silence. His badge read maintenance. His eyes read something else entirely. Patience older than any belt on that wall. Across the mat stood Sensei Kara Lin, 34, her black belt tied with the precision of ego. Around her, 20 students watched, waiting to laugh, unsure if they were allowed. Kara smirked. "Don't worry, I'll go easy on you." The class snickered. Rowan straightened, his mop dripping onto the polished floor. Drip, drip, drip. Like a quiet metronome counting down dignity. He spoke softly, his voice smooth, unthreatening. "I'll finish up when you're done, Sensei. I don't want to disturb the class." That gentleness, that refusal to play, irritated Kara more than defiance ever could. "Disturb?" she echoed. "You already have. Now the only way to make it right is to show us what you've got." A few students exchanged uneasy glances. Sahana Rao, 23, the purple belt near the back, bit her lip. Her studies in kinesiology had taught her enough to sense imbalance, not just of stance, but of spirit. Rowan didn't move. His silence wasn't submission. It was gravity. Kara's grin faltered for half a heartbeat, then she lifted her chin. "Afraid?" The mop slid back into the bucket with a soft thunk. Rowan turned, finally meeting her eyes. He spoke just loud enough for the room to hear. "If I step on that mat, Sensei, when it's over, you'll owe them an apology. Not to me, to them, for turning discipline into a circus." The laughter died instantly. Kara's jaw tightened. She gestured toward the center of the mat. "Then let's see who's performing." The dojo lights hummed. Rain thundered harder outside, as if it too wanted to watch. Rowan stepped out of his worn shoes, rolled his pant legs up an inch, and walked barefoot onto the tatami. The sound of his steps, slow, deliberate, filled the space between everyone's breath. Sahana's pulse quickened. Something in the man's gait betrayed awareness. Not the cautious shuffling of a janitor, but the weighted calm of someone who had once lived inside the rhythm of violence and mercy. Kara bowed, perfunctory, sharp. Rowan returned the bow, slower, lower, precise, like a man paying respect to something sacred she had forgotten. "Basic stance," Kara ordered mockingly. "Show us what you think that means." Rowan exhaled. His knees bent, shoulders relaxed, spine aligned. Nothing flashy, yet the air seemed to settle around him as if gravity itself adjusted. Kara circled. "Good form," she teased, "for someone who probably learned it from YouTube." No answer. Only stillness. Students shifted, unsure whether to laugh or hold their breath. A few noticed how his weight balanced perfectly, not on his heels, not his toes, every joint alive but resting. Kara threw a testing feint. Quick, careless. Rowan didn't flinch. Her second strike came faster, a front snap kick meant to scare. He stepped half an inch sideways. The kick cut empty air. The dojo seemed to inhale. He hadn't blocked, hadn't fought. Just wasn't there. Sahana's eyes widened. his shoulders, hips, breath, all synchronized in a way no beginner could fake.
"Sensei," she murmured, "maybe we should—"
Kara raised a hand to silence her. "Don't interrupt." The storm outside deepened, branches tapping against the glass like impatient ghosts. Kara lunged again, sharper now, her elbow slicing toward his ribs. Rowan pivoted, slow enough to be seen, smooth enough to erase intent. Her momentum spilled forward, his hand merely guiding her past him as if redirecting wind. She recovered, cheeks flushed. The janitor's face remained unchanged, not triumphant.
"Not mocking, just calm."
Sahana realized her throat was dry.
"Who is this man?"
"Enough warm-up," Kara said tightly. "Full speed." She sprang forward. Strike, block, sweep, knee. Every movement she threw met a void, as if she were punching the surface of water. Each miss made her anger bloom wider. Rowan's steps were nearly silent. Each pivot felt like music written for one listener, himself. He spoke once, gently. "You don't fight the current, Sensei. You learn to float." The words hung in the humid air like incense. Kara's next attack lost its rhythm. Her frustration turned to aggression. She drove forward, shouting. Rowan's hand rose, a quiet blur, and stopped just inches from her chest. He didn't strike. He merely touched. But that touch was balance collapsing. Her stance broke, her feet lifted, and the world turned. Kara landed flat on her back, air leaving her lungs in a single stunned gasp. For a moment, the dojo was a cathedral of silence. No laughter. No applause. Just rain whispering against the glass. Rowan stepped back, breathing evenly. He bowed again, the same low, unassuming bow, and spoke softly. "Strength isn't proof. It's a responsibility." Kara blinked up at the ceiling, her pride splintering under the weight of something she didn't yet understand. Sahana exhaled shakily. She felt the air itself had shifted, the dojo no longer belonging to ego, but to humility. Rowan walked toward the corner, picked up his mop, and resumed cleaning the faint outline of footprints, as if erasing the memory of conflict itself. The bucket water rippled from the echo of what had just happened, and when the ripples faded, only the reflection of a man remained, silent, ordinary, and utterly unreadable. Rain still murmured against the dojo roof when the students returned the next night. No one spoke of what had happened, not aloud. Yet silence itself had shape now, stretched thin between every glance, every whispered breath, like a thread pulled too tight. Kara Lynn entered first, bowing briefly to the shrine at the front. Her face looked the same, poised, sharp, controlled, but her eyes carried a faint unrest, the kind that doesn't leave when bruises do. She began class precisely at 7. "Basic stance," she commanded. "Root through the floor again." The thud of synchronized feet echoed, but even rhythm could not hide unease. Half the students kept glancing toward the back corner where the maintenance door stood slightly ajar. The mop bucket was there. So was he. Rowan Hale had arrived early, as always. He didn't look at them, didn't acknowledge the whispers. He was polishing the floor near the wall mirrors, movements quiet and methodical, the mop gliding in slow arcs that mirrored breath itself. Sahana Rao stood at the end of the line, adjusting her belt. She watched him from the mirror, not the way one watches a man, but the way a scientist studies a mystery. There was geometry in how he moved, economy, precision, rhythm too natural to belong to chance. Kara clapped once. "Sahana, pair with Mia, work on transitions." Then her eyes drifted to the corner. "Mr. Hale," she said. The name felt heavy on her tongue. The mop paused mid-swipe. Rowan looked up, expression unreadable. Kara's tone softened, but only slightly. Since you seem interested in our routines, perhaps you'd like to join in properly this time. A ripple of half-laughter passed through the room, more nervous than cruel. Rowan rested the mop upright, leaning his forearms on it like one might lean on an old staff. I'm not here to interrupt your teaching, Sensei. Then don't, Kara said. But you might learn the right way to bow before mocking my class. He tilted his head, that almost imperceptible sadness flickering behind his calm. You mistake restraint for mockery. That single line, low, steady, almost kind, changed the air again. Sahana saw it. Kara's pulse tightened. Her pride bristled. Fine, Kara said, stepping to the center. Let's settle this. You claim discipline, let's see if you even understand foundation. She gestured sharply. Horse stance. For a moment, Rowan said nothing. Then, slowly, he placed the mop aside, wiped his hands on his work pants, and walked barefoot onto the mat once more. The floor seemed to hush under his weight. He stood before her, still and respectful. Then he sank into stance. Not just wide, alive. His breath drew from the floor up through his spine, shoulders open, head slightly lowered. Kara blinked. The form was perfect. No, not perfect. Transparent. Hold, she ordered. He did. Seconds became long. The rain outside grew louder, as though measuring time itself. Students shifted uneasily. Sahana counted in her head. 10, 20, 40 seconds. The man didn't tremble. His posture didn't collapse. It wasn't defiance. It was something gentler. An equilibrium untouched by judgment. Kara paced around him, searching for fault. She found none. You've trained before, she said finally. Rowan's eyes met hers through the reflection in the mirror. Once. Where? Does it matter? Her lips pressed thin. It matters when a janitor pretends to be my equal. That word, janitor, cut through the student's nerves like a blade. Sahana's mouth opened, but Kara turned sharply toward her. Don't, she warned. Don't interfere. Sahana swallowed her protest, but her gaze burned with quiet rebellion. Kara turned back to him. Attack me. I want to see what you think you know. Rowan's expression didn't change. That wouldn't be teaching. Do it. I don't fight people. I study them. She exhaled through her nose. Fine. Then defend yourself. Without waiting for his consent, she moved. A crisp front kick aimed for the abdomen, clean, professional. He slid half a step to the side, the motion barely visible, yet her foot cut through air again. Kara reset. Faster this time. Roundhouse. His body tilted, not away but around her. The strike brushed empty space. Now the room was dead silent. Sahana's breath hitched. She could see it clearly now. The line of his spine, the roll of his hips, the subtle torque that dissolved force rather than opposing it. Internal rotation through the psoas, her mind whispered. Like Tai Chi, but compressed. He wasn't fighting. He was translating her energy into stillness. Kara's irritation began to mix with something else. Fear. Every teacher's nightmare is to face a truth sharper than their technique. She lunged again, this time low, feinting before sweeping. Rowan's right foot anchored, his torso turned, and her own sweep met an invisible barrier. Not contact, but choice. He had simply not been where she assumed he'd be. She stumbled a step. The students inhaled collectively. Rowan lowered his hands, palms open. Sensei, he said gently, your form is sharp, but your intent is rigid. You're striking against ghosts you created. Something cracked inside her. Not bone, not pride. Something older. Kara froze. The words were true, and that made them unbearable. Sahana took a half step forward.
Sensei,
She said softly.
maybe we should.
Kara's voice came out too loud, too fast. Quiet! The sound startled everyone, even her. She turned away from them all, fists tight at her sides, jaw trembling. The rain outside softened, like the world itself sighing. Rowan bent, picked up his mop. He didn't look triumphant, just tired. Teaching isn't about winning, Sensei. It's about listening. He dipped the mop into the bucket, wrung it out, and began to wipe where their feet had scuffed the mat. Gentle circular motions, restoring order. The class stood frozen, not sure whether to bow, to speak, or to breathe. Only Sahana moved. She bowed quietly toward both of them, then returned to her place. Kara stayed still, her reflection staring back at her from the mirrored wall. For the first time in years, she didn't recognize the person bowing there. Rowan's voice drifted across the silence, almost like a prayer. When water meets stone, it doesn't resist. It learns the shape, then flows beyond it. The mop whispered across the floor, slow and steady, until the faint scent of cleaner erased the trace of confrontation. By Friday night, the dojo was quieter than usual. The air felt cautious, as if the walls themselves remembered. Students whispered before class, glancing between their sensei and the man with the mop. Rowan Hale worked in the far corner again, sleeves rolled up, hands steady. Each stroke of his mop was measured, almost meditative. Kara Lynn pretended not to watch him, but every time the handle clicked softly against the bucket, she flinched inside. When the class assembled, she stood in front, spine rigid. "Tonight," she began, "we return to foundations. Breath, stance, focus." Her voice was firm, but her rhythm faltered halfway through the word focus. Sahana Rao noticed it. She always did. Kara's tone carried the fatigue of someone fighting a war she could not name. And Rowan, the ghostly current that had passed through the dojo twice, was the unspoken front line. The students obeyed Kara's count. 1, 2, 3. Feet struck the tatami. Hands sliced air. But underneath, the dojo was divided, between those who trained and those who waited to see if lightning would strike again. Halfway through the drills, Kara called, "Sahana, demonstrate a basic takedown." Sahana stepped forward, bowing. She performed each motion precisely, center balanced, hips aligned, breath timed. "Good," Kara said flatly. "Now, again, with intent." Sahana nodded, repeated, faster. The impact echoed softly. The form was correct, but Kara's expression stayed unreadable. The same hard mask of discipline that had cracked days earlier. Behind her, a quiet voice spoke. "Intent isn't speed, Sensei." Everyone froze. Rowan had spoken without looking up. He was kneeling, wringing out the mop, water glistening like quicksilver between his fingers. Kara turned. "You have something to say, Mr. Hale?" Her tone was cool, but her pulse betrayed her. He met her eyes, unflinching yet kind. Intent lives behind the breath, not inside the muscle. You can move fast and still miss the point. Kara crossed her arms. "You believe you know better?" "No," Rowan said quietly. "I just remember what I learned the hard way." The dojo held its breath. Something in the softness of his words landed deeper than challenge. It was confession disguised as teaching. Sahana couldn't stop herself. "Sensei," she said, "maybe we could ask him to show us?" Kara hesitated. torn between pride and curiosity. The class watched her like witnesses to a duel neither combatant wanted. Finally, she nodded once. "Fine. Demonstrate then." Rowan set the mop aside and stepped onto the mat, barefoot once more. He looked smaller than he had before, quieter, yet somehow the space folded around him. He faced Sahana. "Ready?" She bowed, uncertain. "Yes, sir." "Attack me," he said. Sahana struck gently, more a test than a threat, a straight jab toward his chest. Rowan moved barely an inch. The motion was invisible until it was already done. A shift through the hips, a subtle breath. Her strike dissolved into emptiness, redirected by air itself. He had not stopped her hand. He had simply given it no reason to land. The room filled with a kind of reverent disbelief. "Again," he said. This time Sahana kicked, her form textbook perfect. Rowan's body swayed, just enough for her foot to pass by his sleeve. His hand lifted lightly, not grabbing, just guiding. The momentum folded. Sahana found herself kneeling before she realized what had happened. Rowan helped her up, gentle as rain. "That's intent," he said softly. "Not to win, to understand." Kara's voice trembled despite herself. "You make it look like a trick." "It's not a trick," he said. "It's attention." He turned to the class. "Every motion has two halves. The form, what others see, and the spirit, what you mean. When they align, there's no violence. Only resolution." Kara stepped forward. "You talk like a monk," she said, though her voice had lost its edge. "But a dojo isn't a temple. This is martial art, not philosophy." Rowan regarded her gently. "Then perhaps that's the line you've drawn, between muscle and meaning, between obedience and understanding." Her breath caught. He had seen right through her. "Try me," she said suddenly. The students tensed. No one had expected it. Rowan inclined his head, neither accepting nor refusing. "Are you certain?" "I am." He nodded once. "Then breathe first." Kara lunged without warning. A flash of black belt precision, elbows and knees cutting through air like polished steel. Rowan stepped aside, barely shifting, redirecting each strike into nothing. His body moved like silk drawn through wind, no aggression, no resistance, only inevitability. Kara's frustration surged. She pressed harder, faster, until her breath grew ragged, and then her rhythm cracked. He was no longer defending. He was teaching her where she had left herself behind. Each failed strike reflected her. Every missed beat showing a place where discipline had hardened into armor. She stopped, panting. "Enough!" Rowan lowered his hands. "As you wish." The students didn't dare move. The rain outside had ceased entirely. Only the quiet hum of the air conditioner remained like a low chant. Kara spoke again, quieter now. "What are you trying to prove?" Rowan shook his head. "Nothing. Proof is for doubters. You already have what you're searching for. You've just buried it under your need to be right." Her eyes glistened. For the first time in years, she had no retort. Sahana stepped forward, voice trembling. "Sensei, maybe this is what we were supposed to learn all along." Kara looked at her student, then at Rowan. For the briefest second, her gaze softened, not defeat, but realization. Rowan bowed deeply. "You have strength, Sensei. But strength without silence turns into noise." Then he turned away, picked up his mop again, and began to clean the faint marks of their confrontation. The rhythmic swish filled the room, steady, forgiving, eternal. The students stood still, some with tears they couldn't explain. Sahana whispered, almost to herself, "Form and spirit. I think I finally understand." And Kara, watching the quiet man work, felt something she hadn't in years, the weight of her own heartbeat, heavy and human. Saturday's rain came heavier than ever, not the soft drizzle of patience, but the hard percussion of doubt. By the time Harbor Light Dojo opened, the windows were fogged, and the mirrors along the far wall gleamed like thin sheets of mercury. Carolyn arrived early. She bowed at the threshold, but the ritual felt hollow now, an echo of habit more than reverence. Her reflection bowed back at her. Obedient, lifeless. She pressed her palms together and whispered the words every teacher said before class. Respect, honor, focus. Yet none of them reached her bones, because somewhere between pride and awakening stood one quiet man with a mop, and she didn't know which side of herself he had shaken awake. Rowan Hale was already there, as always. He was kneeling near the storage racks, oiling the wooden Joe staffs with slow precision. Every motion carried the calm authority of someone repairing something more delicate than wood. Memory, perhaps. "Morning, Sensei," he said without looking up. Kara hesitated, the word sensei coming from him unsettlingly natural, as if he'd once said it 1,000 times. "Mr. Hale," she replied, tone clipped. "You're early." He smiled faintly. "So is the rain." There was no irony, no mockery, only an easy calm that made her anger feel childish. By 7, the class had assembled. The air hummed with anticipation. Everyone sensed that tonight would not be routine. Kara called for the warm-up, voice clear but missing its old bite. She corrected postures, adjusted elbows, nodded absently, her attention elsewhere. And then Sahana spoke, quiet but steady. "Sensei," she said, "may we ask Mr. Hale to demonstrate again?" Kara froze. Every pair of eyes turned. Sahana bowed lightly. "It helped us understand the difference between power and pressure." Kara looked toward the corner. Rowan met her gaze. Still, patient, waiting. She could have said no. She almost did, but the weight of her own confusion pressed harder than pride. "Fine," she said. "One last demonstration." Rowan rose, setting the oiled staff aside. His movements, as ever, carried no urgency. He stepped barefoot onto the mat. The light above flickered once. Rain crackled against the skylight. Kara faced him. "Let's keep this simple," she said. "One controlled exchange. You lead." Rowan shook his head. "No, Sensei. You lead. You'll learn more by falling." The words struck her harder than they should have. Falling. A word she had banished from her vocabulary long ago. She took stance. Her heartbeat pulsed in her ears, each beat echoing off the polished floor. This time she wasn't out to humiliate him. She needed to understand. She exhaled, then she moved. A sharp jab, a pivot, a sweep. Rowan shifted, effortless. Every move she made seemed to complete a sentence he had already begun. She advanced again, mixing tempo, low feint, high elbow. He caught her rhythm mid-motion, not blocking, merely occupying the silence between her strikes. Kara's body tightened. Her breath turned ragged. He wasn't faster. He was simply elsewhere. The dojo walls blurred, the students silent, the rain like applause for ghosts. Kara roared, driving forward. An elbow strike meant to test him for real. Rowan stepped in. Not back. In. The contact was soft. the heel of his palm brushing her sternum, just under the clavicle, barely a touch. But that touch carried something deeper than strength, a tremor of aligned momentum, hips, breath, balance, all collapsing into one pulse of internal power. Kara felt it before she understood it. Her weight evaporated. Her center spun. The world tilted. The ceiling flashed above her, white, infinite. Then the mat rose to meet her spine. A dull thud, not pain, just surprise. It was as if the laws of gravity had briefly changed their allegiance. The room froze. The sound of the rain became impossibly distant. No one spoke. Rowan didn't move. He remained standing where he had been, hand still half raised, expression calm, almost mournful. He didn't look like a victor. He looked like a man confirming a law he wished weren't true. Kara blinked at the ceiling. Her breath came shallow, not from injury but from disbelief. She hadn't been thrown. She had been redirected. Her body hadn't been defeated. Her balance had been instructed. Sahana gasped, one hand over her mouth. Mia whispered, "Did he even push her?" No one answered. Rowan stepped forward, knelt beside Kara, and offered his hand. "No harm done," he said softly. "Only gravity doing its work." For a second she wanted to take it, but pride twitched faster than humility. She pushed herself up instead, ignoring his hand. Her legs trembled slightly. "You used internal power," she said, catching her breath. "That wasn't a throw." He nodded. "It wasn't force. It was release. You struck forward. I just helped your energy finish the circle you began." The explanation didn't help. It humbled. Every word undressed years of martial pretense, leaving her face to face with the truth. She had mastered motion, not meaning. Her lips parted, but no words came. Sahana's eyes shone. "That's physics," she murmured. "Kinetic redirection, but perfect control." Rowan smiled faintly. "Physics and kindness aren't so different." He turned toward the class. "When we hit, we ask the world to move for us. When we yield, we learn how it already moves." The students bowed, almost instinctively. Kara did not. She stood still, trembling slightly. Her heart burned with the strange ache of awe and shame braided together. Rowan returned to the edge of the mat, picked up the mop again. The floor beneath him shimmered faintly, rainwater that had leaked through the roof, pooling near the corner. He began to mop it away. Kara watched, dazed, as his movements mirrored what she'd just felt. Effortless, circular, complete. It wasn't cleaning. It was a kind of prayer. For the first time in her career, she dismissed the class early. As the students bowed out, Sahana lingered near the door, whispering to her softly, "Sensei, sometimes falling is the beginning of balance." Kara didn't reply. When the last student left, she stood alone under the dim light. The rain eased, leaving the faint smell of wet cedar. She turned toward Rowan, who was still working, quiet, unassuming, as though the miracle he'd just performed was a small act of housekeeping. She opened her mouth, then closed it. He looked up once, eyes calm, patient as ever. "You'll understand when you stop trying to win." Then he wrung out the mop, and the sound of dripping water filled the space like the slow tick of time returning. Kara stared at her hands, the same hands that had broken boards, thrown men twice her size, signed certificates of mastery. They trembled now, not from weakness, but from awakening. Outside, the clouds parted. For a brief, impossible moment, moonlight pierced through the glass roof, falling across the mat where she'd landed. The silver glow traced the faint outline of her fall, soft, circular, like the ripple of a current returning home. The next morning, Seattle woke under a silver fog. The city's noise came muffled, softened by mist. Inside Harbor Light Dojo, the scent of tatami and cedar mingled with something quieter. Anticipation. No one had said it out loud, but the rumor was already alive. The janitor wasn't just a janitor. Carolyn arrived early. She hadn't slept. Her reflection in the locker room mirror showed exhaustion drawn in fine strokes around the eyes, and something new beneath, humility, raw and unfamiliar. She bowed to her reflection anyway. The act didn't cleanse her, but it reminded her she was still capable of kneeling. When she stepped into the training hall, Rowan was there, polishing the edges of a floor mat. The bucket beside him reflected the faint light like a small, private moon. "Morning," he said simply. Kara paused. "You always come before dawn?" He smiled. "I work better when the world hasn't decided who it is yet." By 7, the students arrived, whispering, glancing, trying to read both their teachers like pages of an unfinished story. Sahana Rao moved among them quietly, phone in hand. She had spent the night chasing a suspicion that refused to leave her mind. A fragment of memory, a glimpse of movement that matched something she'd once seen years ago on an old VHS highlight reel her brother used to worship. When the class settled, Kara cleared her throat. "Today we'll discuss discipline," she began, but the word felt false even as it left her mouth. Before she could continue, Sahana stepped forward, hesitating only once. "Sensei," she said, "before we start, may I ask something?" Kara blinked. "What is it?" Sahana turned her phone screen toward the group. The old footage flickered. A younger man, bare-chested, under the roar of an arena. He moved like a storm that refused to break. Precise, silent, devastating. The announcer's voice thundered over the crowd. "Rowan the Silent Current hail! 5-time MMA world champion, undefeated record, 41 wins, 0 losses." The dojo went still. All eyes turned to the man in the corner. Rowan stopped mid-motion. The mop froze in his hand. Kara felt her pulse stumble. "That's..." Sahana nodded. "It's him." Someone whispered, 41 and oh. Another added, "Almost 20 years ago." Rowan exhaled, eyes lowering. The sound was less of guilt than of surrender, like air leaving a closed room at last. "That name doesn't belong to me anymore." The silence deepened, not hostile, reverent. Kara took a step forward, her voice barely steady. "You were the silent current?" "Once," he said, "before silence became my only way to live." "Why hide it?" He looked around the dojo, the curious faces, the trophies gleaming behind glass, the faint echo of footsteps on the mat. "Because strength can build a cage just as easily as it can build a life. I broke too many things thinking I was saving them." Sahana whispered, "You could have been teaching for decades." "Teaching what?" Rowan's tone sharpened slightly. "How to hit harder." "I already taught that once, and someone never woke up." The words fell heavy, dull, true. Kara's breath caught. "You mean..." Rowan nodded slowly. "Miami. Atlantic Dome. I was 29. He was my friend. A sparring match turned ugly, one mistake. And I took from him what I can never give back." The rain outside began again, soft, like apology. "After that," Rowan continued, "I promised never to use force without purpose. So I walked away. Changed my life, not my name. Cleaned floors. Built a life where no one cheered when I hurt someone." He looked down at his hands, wide, scarred, steady. These hands killed brilliance once. I've been learning how to use them for peace ever since. No one moved. Even Kara forgot to breathe. Sahana's eyes glistened. She whispered to another student. He wasn't hiding. He was repenting. Rowan gave a faint, rueful smile. Repentance is a heavy word. I'd call it practice. Kara stepped closer, voice trembling. You could have told us. He met her gaze, calm as ever. Would you have listened? Her lips parted, then closed again. You respected the belt, not the lesson, he said gently. And maybe I needed to learn that too. That wisdom unspoken dies in silence. The class stood frozen, caught between awe and shame. The very space seemed to breathe differently, the dojo itself humbled by truth. Kara lowered her eyes. I humiliated you, she said quietly. No, he replied. You revealed me. There's a difference. Why not fight back harder? Because fighting you wasn't the lesson. Letting you see yourself was. Kara's shoulders shook. For the first time, tears traced her cheek. You could have destroyed me. I did, Rowan said softly. But not the way you think. She looked up sharply, but his eyes were kind, not cruel. Destruction can clear ground for something better, he added. I hope that's what this is. Sahana spoke, breaking the silence with trembling courage. Sensei, Mr. Hale. She hesitated, then continued. You both taught us more in these few nights than all the drills combined. Her eyes turned to Kara. Maybe. It's time we stop pretending perfection is what makes a master. Kara bowed her head. Maybe it's time I stop pretending I'm one. Rowan smiled faintly. Mastery isn't the absence of mistakes. It's knowing what to do after you make them. He picked up his mop again, lowering himself back to the task with reverence, not shame. Each motion carried the weight of an old ritual rediscovered, the sound of the mop whispering across the mat like forgiveness given form. Kara watched him, her pride breaking cleanly into something truer. I spent my life chasing control, she said. And you found peace by letting go. Letting go isn't weakness, he murmured. It's choosing which weight to carry. When class ended, no one spoke of belts or rank or drills. They bowed together, a single quiet motion, uncoached, unforced. And when Kara lifted her head, she saw not a janitor, not a fighter, but a man who had already traveled the full circle she was just beginning. For the first time, she understood what her father had once told her. True mastery begins the day you kneel to someone you once dismissed. That night, long after everyone left, Kara stood alone near me, gazing at the empty mat. She whispered into the still air, I'm sorry. From across the hall, Rowan's voice answered softly, Then teach different. He turned off the lights, leaving the dojo in darkness. But for Kara Lynn, it was the first real dawn. Night cloaked Seattle in the sound of rain, a soft percussion that made every streetlight flicker like memory. Rowan Hale walked alone beneath it, collar turned up, the mop handle silhouette still ghosting his grip even when empty-handed. He didn't go home right away. Instead, he found himself wandering toward the one place that had never left him, the ocean's edge behind the old pier, where water met shadow and forgot which was which. There, the past waited. He closed his eyes, and it came rushing back. Miami. Atlantic Dome. Summer of 2006. The cage lights had been blinding. The crowd a living ocean of adrenaline. He remembered the sound of gloves cracking against flesh, the roar, the commentary, the silent current, unstoppable again. And opposite him stood Diego Reyes, his sparring partner, friend, almost brother. They had trained together for 7 years. Diego was the only one who could read his rhythm, the only one who dared to say, "Slow down, Rowan. You're starting to enjoy the storm." That night was supposed to be exhibition, a friendly spar, a showcase of control. But the crowd demanded violence. The sponsors wanted a spectacle, and pride, that old, poisonous whisper, rose from inside him like a tide too long restrained. He saw it all again in fractured flashes. The bell, the feints, the speed, the blur. The moment Diego slipped on sweat and momentum turned fatal. Rowan's left hook landed, precise, perfect, unforgiving. He saw Diego fall, heard the hollow sound, not of impact, but of life leaving air. Then the chaos. Medics rushing, announcers stammering, cameras cutting away. Rowan kneeling beside his friend, shaking his shoulder, whispering, "Breathe. You're fine. You're fine, brother." But Diego never opened his eyes again. The silence that followed was louder than any victory. He remembered the press conferences, the headlines. Champions strike kills in sparring accident. The sponsors withdrew. The league distanced itself. Reporters called him a monster who smiled while breaking bones, but none of them knew the truth. It wasn't the punch that destroyed him. It was the intention. He had thrown that strike to prove something, to win an argument invisible to everyone but him. So he left, walked away from contracts, lights, and applause, took the first job that made him invisible: janitor, handyman, floor cleaner, anything that didn't require fists. He opened his eyes now, back at the pier. The rain had soaked his jacket through. In his pocket was a photograph, the edges worn soft, 2 young men laughing, gloves slung around their necks. He placed it against the wooden railing, letting droplets gather on the ink. "I told you I'd never fight again," he whispered. "But I was wrong, Diego. I've been fighting every day since, just without the ring." Behind him, the sea swallowed the horizon. He spoke softly, almost to the wind. "I thought silence would save me, but silence just let guilt grow roots." He returned to the dojo before dawn, the key turning in the lock like a confession being spoken aloud. Inside, the mats glowed faintly under emergency lights. Carolyn was already there, sitting cross-legged at the center, eyes closed, her breath slow. She didn't turn when he entered. "I knew you'd come back tonight," she said. "You always know what your students will do," he replied quietly. "I'm not your student." "Not yet." Her lips curved into something between a smile and surrender. "I wanted to ask," she began, then hesitated. "When you said you hurt someone, was it true?" Rowan nodded, slow as guilt itself. "His name was Diego Reyes." The name fell like a stone into the stillness. Kara opened her eyes. "Tell me." He sat down across from her, the sound of rain tracing their silence. "We fought once too many times. I thought I was helping him train harder. Truth was, I wanted to win. And when he fell, I didn't just lose a friend. I lost the right to call myself a fighter." His voice cracked once, and he let it. "I quit because I didn't trust myself anymore. I didn't want my daughter growing up thinking power made you good." "Your daughter?" Rowan smiled faintly. "Maya. She's 10. She thinks I fix things at night. She's not wrong." He looked up, eyes glistening with the kind of grief that never fully heals. "Every floor I cleaned, every scratch I scrubbed. I pretended I was erasing that moment, but nothing ever came off. Kara's own eyes softened. "Maybe you've been cleaning the wrong thing," she said. He blinked, surprised. "You can't wash away guilt," she continued. "You can only transform it into responsibility." Rowan let out a low laugh. "You sound like him." "Diego?" "He used to say the same thing, that every fight is just an argument with yourself about what kind of person you are." They sat in silence. The rain slowed to a hush. Kara leaned forward. "What will you do now?" He looked around the dojo, the weapons rack, the mirrors, the mat that still remembered her fall. "Maybe teach again, but differently this time. Not how to strike, how not to." "Would you teach us?" she asked, almost a whisper. He smiled. "Only if you promise one thing." "What?" "That you'll teach with me. You still have something I lost. Faith that discipline can heal." She hesitated, then nodded. "Then we teach together." Rowan stood, walked toward the old dojo banner, and ran a hand across the faded calligraphy. "True strength protects, never punishes." He whispered the words as if reading them for the first time. Then he turned back to Kara. "Tomorrow," he said, "bring the students. There's someone they need to meet." "Who?" "The man who taught me what strength costs." Her brow furrowed. Then realization dawned. The grave. Rowan nodded. It's time they learn the story from where it ended, and how it might begin again. Outside, the clouds began to break, pale light slipping through like forgiveness testing its own courage. Kara watched him standing by the door, the rain turning to mist around his silhouette. He looked back once, voice low, steady, filled with the strange peace that follows confession. "The strongest hands," he said, "are the ones that can lift without striking." And then he stepped out into the dawn, the world quietly washing itself clean behind him. Sunday morning broke clear for the first time in a week. The city gleamed as though the rain had been an act of mercy rather than weather, washing away what pride refused to cleanse. Inside Harborlight Dojo, the floor smelled faintly of lemon oil. The mats had dried, the mirrors caught the early sunlight, and for once the silence was gentle. Kara Lynn stood at the center, dressed in a plain gray gi instead of her black one. Her belt lay folded beside her, not around her waist, but on the floor, like an offering. The students entered in small groups, voices low. They sensed something different in the air, not tension, not discipline, but something older and softer, repentance. At the far end of the room, Rowan Hale waited, hands loosely behind his back, head slightly bowed. He wore no belt at all. When everyone was gathered, Kara stepped forward. She bowed deeply, not to tradition, but to truth. "Before we train," she said, "I owe you all something." Her voice shook only once, at the word owe. She looked at each face in turn, her students, her witnesses. "I have spent years teaching that respect is earned through strength, that authority requires fear, and that silence equals discipline. But I was wrong." The dojo didn't move, not a breath dared interrupt. "I humiliated someone who deserved reverence," she continued, glancing toward Rowan, "and I mistook cruelty for control." A murmur rippled through the class, not judgmental, empathetic. Kara swallowed. "To Mr. Hale, to Sahana, to every one of you who stayed silent when I shamed someone weaker, I apologize." Then she bowed again, lower this time, her palms flat against the mat. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Rowan stepped forward, his shadow overlapping hers. He waited until she looked up. "Apology accepted," he said softly. "But apology is only the first breath. What matters is how you teach after this one." She nodded, tears gathering but unshed. "Then tell me, what should I do differently?" He considered her quietly, as if weighing not her words but her readiness. "Start by unlearning the need to win, and by asking instead of commanding." Rowan turned to the class. "Today, your lesson isn't combat, it's correction. You will each teach one movement, not to show power, but to show patience." The students looked at one another, uncertain. Rowan smiled faintly. "That's how it begins. Confusion is just humility in disguise." He gestured toward Sahana. "You first." Sahana approached, bowing to both instructors. She turned toward a younger student, demonstrating a slow block. "Not to stop the strike," she said, "but to listen to where it's coming from." Her words trembled at first, then steadied. The class followed her rhythm, each movement smaller, more deliberate, less about dominance than awareness. For the first time, the dojo felt alive without noise. Each breath synchronized, not by command, but by shared purpose. When the drill ended, Rowan walked to Kara and handed her the mop, the same one that had once divided them. She stared at it, uncertain. "Every dojo," he said, "needs someone willing to clean. The floor, the ego, the air." Kara accepted it, then began to mop the mat in slow, circular motions. Her movements were awkward at first, self-conscious, but soon she found rhythm, a kind of meditation in humility. Sahana watched with quiet admiration. "Sensei," she said, "it suits you." Kara smiled faintly. "Then maybe I'm finally learning something real." After the session, the students lingered, reluctant to leave. They spoke in hushed tones, exchanging fragments of awe and relief. One boy asked, "Is he really going to teach here?" Sahana answered, "He already is." Rowan waited until the last student left, then turned to Kara. "You did well," he said. "I stumbled through half of it." "Good. Perfection makes terrible teachers." Kara looked down at the mop still in her hands. "What's next?" He hesitated. "A promise." They sat on the floor, facing each other as equals. Kara asked, "A promise for what?" "For tomorrow," Rowan said. "We'll visit a friend. The man I hurt. The one who gave me the right to teach again." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Diego." He nodded. The students deserve to meet the truth, not the myth. Kara drew a slow breath. "Do you think it will help them?" "It helped me. Pain becomes wisdom only when it's witnessed." For a while they said nothing. The dojo was filled only with the whisper of the mop drying on its stand and the soft thud of rain returning outside, a steady rhythm that sounded like forgiveness breathing. Then Kara spoke again, quieter. "Rowan, why did you stay here? In this city? In this small dojo?" He looked at her with that unhurried serenity she had come to envy. "Because one night, a little girl left a note for her janitor father. It said, 'You don't have to be famous for me to be proud of you.'" His voice faltered just slightly at the word father. Kara smiled, understanding. "Maya." He nodded. "Everything I do now, it's for her to grow up knowing that strength isn't loud." Kara rose, folded her hands, and bowed deeply. "Then let me be your student too." Rowan shook his head gently. "No, Kara. We're both students now. of the same lesson, how to carry power without letting it carry us. They shared a silence that felt almost sacred. Outside, the rain thinned into mist, and a thin beam of sunlight filtered through the high windows, falling directly onto the patch of floor she had mopped clean. It shimmered like a new beginning. Before leaving, Rowan paused by the door. "Tomorrow, bring flowers," he said. Kara frowned. "For Diego? For the lesson he paid for?" She nodded, eyes moist. "I'll tell the students." Rowan smiled. "No. Let them decide for themselves if they're ready to face what built their teacher." When he stepped into the daylight, the sky had softened to a bruised blue, the color between regret and renewal. He walked home slowly, past puddles that mirrored the clouds, each step lighter than it had been in years, and behind him, in the quiet dojo, Carolyn stood alone, holding the mop like a staff, whispering to the air that still remembered their fights. Strength that cleans is stronger than strength that conquers. For the first time, she believed it. The morning broke pale and windless, the kind of quiet that makes even birds hesitate to sing. A convoy of cars rolled slowly along the narrow road leading out of Seattle. 10 students, Carolyn, and one silent man with a small bouquet of white lilies on the passenger seat beside him. They arrived at Haven Hill Cemetery just as the clouds began to thin. The world seemed rinsed clean, as if the sky itself had bowed its head. Rowan Hale led them down a gravel path lined with old oaks. His steps were unhurried, deliberate, as though he knew the weight of every footprint on sacred ground. At the back of the cemetery stood a modest headstone, half covered by moss. Diego Reyes, 1979 to 2006. Below the name, faint but still visible, was an inscription. He fought with honor and rested in peace. The students stood in a semicircle, uncertain whether to bow or simply breathe. Rowan knelt, brushed the moss away with his fingers, and placed the lilies at the base of the stone. He spoke softly, not to the grave, but through it. "Hey, brother, I brought the noise with me, but it's quieter now." The wind stirred once, almost in reply. Kara bowed beside him. "Mr. Hale," she said. "Or Rowan, may I?" He nodded. She knelt too, lowering her head, palms together. "Mr. Reyes, I never knew you, but your story changed how I teach, how I breathe, how I see what power can do. Thank you for what you gave us, and for what you cost him." The students followed, bowing in silence, some clutching flowers, others only their own trembling breath. Sahana stepped forward last, tears streaking her cheeks. "Sensei Rowan," she asked softly, "may we know what he was like?" Rowan smiled faintly. "Louder than thunder, kinder than I deserved." He touched the edge of the stone. He had this habit. After every match, no matter who won, he'd pat me on the shoulder and say, "One day, you'll hit so gently the world will still feel it." I never understood what he meant until I stopped hitting. The words hovered between grief and grace. Rowan rose slowly, turning to the group. "You've all trained to strike, to block, to endure. But today, I want you to learn something else." He gestured toward the open air. "Stand with your feet on the earth. Close your eyes. Breathe until you can feel the pulse of the ground beneath you. That's the same rhythm beating under this grave, the same rhythm Diego lived and died by." They obeyed. A dozen bodies still as trees, the wind threading softly through their hair. "That pulse," he continued, "isn't just life. It's forgiveness, the kind that doesn't need words." Kara opened her eyes. Her voice came low, reverent. "Is that why you came back?" To find forgiveness? Rowan looked at her and smiled, weary but peaceful. I came back because forgiveness isn't something you find. It's something you practice until it becomes the way you stand. He pointed to the students. Look at them. They think I'm teaching them martial arts, but I'm really teaching them how to fall without breaking, and how to lift someone else without pride. Maya ran up the hill just then, Rowan's daughter clutching a paper crane in her small hands. She had come with one of the students' parents, her dark hair catching the wind like ink. "Daddy," she called. "I made this for him." Rowan knelt as she placed the paper crane atop the flowers. "What's it for?" he asked. She grinned shyly. "To help him fly." The simplicity of the answer made even the strongest among them look away to hide tears. Rowan whispered, "He already is, sweetheart." For a long while, no one spoke. Only the wind and the sound of distant waves below the hill carried the conversation forward. Kara broke the silence. "Sensei," she said, using the title deliberately this time, "if Diego were here, what would you say to him?" Rowan's answer came without pause. "That I finally understand the match we were really fighting." He looked back at the stone. "We thought we were proving who was stronger, but it was always about who could hold compassion under pressure. He won that fight the moment I lost him." Sahana's voice trembled. "Do you still blame yourself?" Rowan exhaled slowly. "Blame's a heavy stone. I carried it for years thinking it was penance. Turns out I mistook blame for penance." He looked at her kindly. "You can't fix the past, but you can stop it from repeating through you." Kara nodded, her voice steady now. "Then that's our lesson today." They gathered in a small circle around the grave. Rowan bowed once more, palms pressed together. "Thank you, Diego," he whispered. "Your silence still teaches." Then he stood, motioning for the students to follow. "One more thing before we leave," he said. "When you bow next time in the dojo, don't just bow to each other. Bow to every mistake that taught you something. That's where the real masters live." As they walked back toward the cars, the air grew warmer, sunlight piercing through the clouds. Maya slipped her hand into her father's. "Daddy, are you sad?" He smiled. "No, sweetheart, I'm remembering." "What's remembering?" He thought for a moment. "It's when the heart bows even after the body stands up." Maya nodded as if that made perfect sense. Kara lingered for a final glance. She whispered to the wind, "He's not gone, is he?" Rowan's voice answered softly behind her, "No one who taught us how to be gentle ever really leaves." They walked together down the path, shoes crunching on gravel, their shadows long and even. Teacher and student, mirror and reflection, both humbled, both changed. Behind them, the lilies swayed, and the paper crane lifted slightly in the breeze, wings trembling, ready to rise. The next week, the rain stopped for good. Sunlight poured through the wide windows of Harbor Light Dojo, turning the once sterile hall into something almost holy. Dust motes floating like prayers above the mats. It no longer smelled of sweat and ambition. It smelled of cedar oil, fresh air, and quiet resolve. Where trophies had once gleamed behind glass, Kara Lynn had replaced them with a single framed inscription handwritten in black ink by Rowan Hale himself. "Respect is the floor we stand on, not the prize we earn." The students gathered beneath it, their chatter softer now, their movements slower. There was no command to line up. They did it instinctively, each bowing before stepping onto the mat, as though the ground itself deserved reverence. Rowan stood by the window, sunlight tracing the edges of his weathered face. He watched Kara adjust a young student's stance, gently, patiently, without correction in her tone. Her voice carried no authority anymore, only care. "Feel your breath, Arya," she said softly. "Let it find your balance before your feet do." The girl, 15, quiet, with bruises not from training but from schoolyard cruelty, nodded. She exhaled. Her hands steadied. Rowan smiled faintly. Kara noticed. "What?" "You sound like you've been teaching your whole life for this moment," he said. She shrugged. "Maybe I've just been unlearning." After class, the students gathered around Rowan. He placed a rolled parchment on the floor. When he unfurled it, the letters were bold, deliberate, ink still faintly wet. Harbor Light Code of Respect. He handed Kara a brush. "You'll write the first rule." She hesitated, then dipped the brush into ink and wrote slowly, carefully. "No voice shall rise above the truth." Sahana took the brush next. Question to understand, not to challenge. Then the youngest student, Arya, reached up shyly and wrote her own. "Crooked but brave, be kind, louder than you are strong." By the time they were done, 10 sentences stretched across the parchment, a map of how to be human, disguised as martial philosophy. They pinned the code on the dojo wall. Beneath it hung a new calendar, Community Days. Every Sunday, instead of sparring, the students would visit local shelters, clean public spaces, teach self-defense to seniors, and read to children. "Strength," Rowan said, "has to circulate, like air. If it doesn't move, it spoils." Kara smiled. "Then this dojo will breathe." Over the weeks, the atmosphere transformed. The dojo, once known for fierce tournaments, became known for quiet evenings, where children meditated before their parents picked them up, where older students mentored the young not with drills, but with stories of restraint. Even the sound of the mop on the floor changed meaning. When Rowan cleaned, students would join him, not out of duty, but gratitude. A ritual of grounding, a reminder that no one stands above service. One evening, a new student arrived, a teenage boy with tattoos on his forearms and anger behind his eyes. He stood at the door, unsure if he was welcome. Kara approached, her tone gentle but firm. "You're safe here," she said. "Take your shoes off. Leave the world outside." He hesitated. "I don't have money for classes." She smiled. "Then you'll help me sweep. Fair trade?" The boy blinked, then nodded. He would later tell Rowan that those words saved his life. As the weeks passed, word spread. Former students returned. Parents joined the meditation sessions. Even the local community began to call Harbor Light not a dojo, but a haven. A journalist once visited to write an article. She asked Rowan, "What changed?" He wiped his hands on a towel, thinking. "Everything," he said, "except the floor. It still teaches the same lesson, that when we fall, we're closer to the truth." Late one night, when the last student had gone, Rowan sat at the edge of the mat, looking around the space that had once been defined by conflict and now pulsed with peace. Kara joined him, a cup of tea in hand. "They've started calling you sensei again," she said. He chuckled. "Titles are lighter when they're not armor." "You rebuilt this place." He shook his head. "We rebuilt it. You chose to stay. You chose to change." She looked at the code on the wall, the ink now darkened into permanence. "You know," she said, "when you threw me that night, I thought you humiliated me. And now?" She smiled softly. "Now I think you caught me before I fell too far." They sat in silence for a while, the hum of the city outside fading into calm. Kara broke it first. "What about Maya? Has she been here lately?" Rowan nodded. "She comes on weekends. watches, sometimes joins in. She says the dojo smells like courage. Kara laughed quietly. She's not wrong. She's the reason I still teach, he said, because someday she'll ask me what it means to be strong, and I want the answer to already be alive in this room. The next Sunday, during their community day, the students gathered in front of the dojo before heading out. Arya tugged at Kara's sleeve. Sensei? Yes? Will Mr. Rowan get his black belt back? Kara glanced at him. He smiled, shaking his head. The belt's just fabric, Arya. It holds your guy together, not your worth. But don't you miss it? Rowan crouched, meeting her eyes. No, because now the respect I wear isn't tied around my waist. It walks beside me. That night, after the others left, Kara found Rowan writing alone at the front desk. What are you working on? She asked. He turned the notebook toward her. It was a list of names, all his students, and beside each a short note. Sahana. Voice like water. Arya. Courage before confidence. Kara. Learning to teach without fear. She smiled. You're still keeping records? Only of what matters, he said. The kind of victories that never fit in a trophy case. When he left that evening, the lights dimmed behind him, casting the dojo in a warm amber glow. On the wall, the harbor light code fluttered gently in the draft from the closing door, as though bowing to the night. For the first time in years, Rowan didn't look back. He didn't need to. The lesson had taken root. And this time, it would keep growing long after he was gone. A year later, the same hill that once held silence now held life. The Harbor Light Dojo family had returned, 40 students, parents, and teachers walking in calm procession through the morning mist. Some carried flowers, others carried memory. All carried gratitude. At the front walked Rowan Hale and his daughter Maya, hand in hand. She had grown taller, her hair tied back neatly, her eyes bright with the serene confidence of a child who had learned that gentleness was not weakness. The road beneath them was lined with dew, glistening like a quiet applause from the world itself. They stopped at the grave of Diego Reyes. The lilies had long faded, but a small paper crane, now weathered and gray, still perched upon the stone. Maya noticed it first. Daddy, she whispered. The bird stayed. Rowan smiled softly. Some things know when they're meant to stay. The students formed a circle around the grave. Carolyn placed a new bouquet of white orchids beside the old crane. The wind brushed through the oaks. 1,000 tiny leaves murmured above them, like an unseen crowd bowing in respect. Rowan stepped forward, holding a folded parchment, the Harbor Light Code. He unfolded it and read aloud, voice calm, resonant, carrying both age and renewal. Respect is the floor we stand on, not the prize we earn. Be kind, louder than you are strong. Teach not to win, but to understand. He paused, looking around at the faces, children, adults, the once wounded and the once proud. A year ago, this dojo was just a room. Today, it's a river. Each of you, a current. And a river doesn't ask for power. It just flows, shaping everything it touches. Kara stepped beside him, placing a hand over her heart. Before I met Rowan, she said, I believed power made me respected. But now I know. It only made me feared. Respect grew the day I learned to bow first. Her eyes glistened as she looked at the students. And you, all of you, reminded me that humility is not the absence of pride, but the presence of awareness. The students bowed deeply in return. Even the wind seemed to still for a moment, as if the earth itself were listening. After the ceremony, they returned to the dojo. A banner hung above the entrance now, Harbor Light, where power learns peace. The building was fuller than ever, children laughing in the courtyard, parents watching from benches, and inside, a stillness that no longer feared silence. On the wall near the code hung 2 photographs side by side. One of Diego Reyes in his prime, smiling, hands wrapped in tape. One of Rowan, barefoot on the mat, eyes closed, serene. Beneath them, a line in calligraphy read, "Those who fight within find peace without." That afternoon, Rowan led a lesson, his last before passing the title of chief instructor to Kara. He wore no belt, no uniform, only a white shirt and worn pants. Maya sat cross-legged at the edge of the mat, watching as if the moment were a story being written for her alone. "Today," Rowan began, "we will not strike, block, or fall. We will listen." He gestured toward the students. "Close your eyes. Imagine the river. Feel how it moves, not by force, but by direction." The room filled with the rhythm of breath, steady, collective. "You are not the water," he continued. "You are the space it flows through. What you think you control is only what you haven't yet understood." A long silence followed, but it wasn't emptiness. It was fullness without noise, the final mastery every fighter seeks and few find. After class, Kara approached him quietly. "Are you sure you're ready to stop teaching?" He smiled. "You don't stop teaching, Kara. You just change your audience." She frowned playfully. "And who's your next one?" He looked toward Maya, who was now helping Arya roll up the mats. "The one who already knows more about peace than I ever did." Kara's eyes softened. "She'll make a fine sensei one day." Rowan shook his head. "No, she'll make a kind one. That's better." As dusk fell, Rowan locked the dojo doors for the night. He and Maya walked home together beneath a violet sky. The city lights shimmered on wet pavement, each reflection bending like the surface of memory. "Daddy," Maya asked, "will you ever fight again?" He thought for a while before answering. "Every day, just not with my hands." "What do you fight then?" "The part of me that forgets what Diego taught me. That control isn't power, it's mercy." Maya nodded seriously. "Then I'll fight that too." He smiled. "Good. But remember, winning isn't the point. Listening is." When they reached their apartment, Maya handed him a folded paper. Inside was a drawing, her father mopping a dojo floor while students bowed around him. At the bottom, she had written in crooked letters, "My dad teaches without shouting." Rowan stared at it for a long time, then folded it carefully and tucked it into his pocket. "You just gave me my new belt," he said quietly. Maya giggled. "Paper belt?" "No, truth belt." That night, long after she had gone to bed, Rowan stood by the window watching the city lights shimmer like scattered lanterns on the river. He closed his eyes and felt the steady hum beneath it all. Life moving, forgiving, carrying everything forward whether it was ready or not. Somewhere in that rhythm, he imagined Diego's voice again. "One day, you'll hit so gently the world will still feel it." He smiled. "You were right, brother. I finally did." The next morning, Kara opened the dojo to find a note pinned to the door, written in Rowan's simple, careful handwriting. "I've gone to teach the tide. Keep the floor clean. The current is yours now." Underneath, his old mop leaned against the wall, polished, spotless, gleaming like a staff of quiet wisdom. Kara pressed her hand to her chest and bowed. She whispered, "Thank you, teacher." Years later, the Harbor Light Dojo would grow, 50, then 100 students. Children who had never met Rowan would still bow to his name every class. They would hear stories of a janitor who once defeated a black belt not with strength, but with silence. And once a year, they would visit a hill by the sea, carrying lilies and cranes to honor the man who turned violence into grace. Under the steady wind, the waves of Puget Sound rolled endlessly against the rocks. Each crest rose and fell like breath, like forgiveness, like life. And if you listened closely enough, you could almost hear it. A voice somewhere in the water, soft, eternal. The current doesn't fight the shore. It chooses it,